Hare Krishna, everyone. So we're going to continue on with our final session of discussing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Bengali poem Vaisnava Ke. What kind of devotee are you? So we've completed the first 12 verses. There's 19 verses in total. So we'll do the last 7 verses today. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So we take the blessings of the Vaishnavas and Srila Prabhupada, and through Srila Prabhupada we request the blessings of his Guru Maharaj Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, so that we can discuss this very revealing poem and very instructive poem to our mind. So we'll just quickly recap what we discussed last week. So we were discussing verses 7 to 12. So we were talking about Madhavendra Puri and about how Madhavendra Puri, being a Vaishnava sannyasi, a Tridandi sannyasi, a pure devotee, he was constitutionally fixed in his swarup, in his relationship with Krishna. And as a result, even though he was traveling around Vrndavan, pretty much just chanting the holy name, his activities are not to be imitated. And we also made the point that even though he was, in one sense, doing Nirjan Bhajan, when the time came to him establishing Gopal's temple on the top of Govardhan Hill, he actually, managed that whole affair with so many Vrajabasis, with so many devotees in a very amazing fashion. So we're talking about Anusar and Anukar. So Anusar means to follow in the footsteps of devotees, and Anukar means to imitate devotees. And we were discussing about the Gopi Bhava Club, the first, or hopefully the only Apasiddhantic faction within ISKCON that was formed by some devotees under Srila Prabhupada's very nose. And Srila Prabhupada got very angry and upset as soon as he found out, and he severely chastised the devotees, and he dismantled that whole Gopi Bhava Club. Then we were talking about the envy of the mind, about how the nature of the mind is just to engage in sense gratification. We have to remember that it's the spirit soul which is going back to home, back to Godhead. Our material body is not going, and definitely our mind is not going. So the mind will always come up with obstacles that will prevent the spirit soul from going back home, back to Godhead, because it's not the interests of the mind to go. So the point was being made that when a Vaishnava surrenders to a guru, starts following the 4 regulative principles, starts taking instructions from the spiritual master, associates with devotees, and then all of a sudden the mind finds itself in a situation where it's constrained and it can't act freely anymore. And then naturally, what does the mind do? Then naturally the mind starts to find faults with the process of devotional service, with the devotees, and in that way sometimes devotees leave Krishna consciousness, unfortunately. We were talking about Sanatana Goswami and the 2 instructions which he received from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The first instruction, which is a very prevalent and regularly occurring theme in Vaishnava Ke, is that of Yukta Vairagya. Not artificial, and we'll see in today's verse 13 that we'll start with today. Again, that theme will be there, of Yukta Vairagya. So using everything in Krishna's service, material things in Krishna's service. And the second instruction to Sanatana Goswami was to build temples and to write literatures and to preach Krishna consciousness. Then we were talking about Haridas Thakur and specifically the loud chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And it's explained that Haridas Thakur has said that, mantras can be chanted in 3 different fashions, right? Manasik, Upamsu, and Vachasik, right? Loudly, in a whispering fashion, that's called Upamsu, and then Manasik, which means in your mind. Traditionally, when you chant a mantra in your mind, it's said to be more powerful. The effects are supposed to be more powerful. But the opposite is true with the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Doesn't mean that you can't chant in your mind. Haridas Thakur was also chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, part of his quota in his mind, but he himself is saying that when one chants the Hare Krishna Mahamantra loudly, not only does one benefit other living entities, he says that one gets 1,000 times the benefit chanting loudly the Hare Krishna Mahamantra than one does chanting in the mind. And he says that a devotee who chants the Hare Krishna Mahamantra loudly, such a devotee is 100 times superior than another devotee who chants the Hare Krishna Mahamantra within his or her mind. And then we were explaining about the different types of Nishiddha Acharas, which are behaviors which are not good for us to cultivate pure devotional service. All right, so we're talking about Jiva Himsa, which is committing violence towards other living entities, which not just means like animal killing, hurting other living entities, but also means stopping being an obstacle in another living entity's path for them to advance in Krishna consciousness or even take up the process of Krishna consciousness in the first place. And then there's Kutinati, which is diplomatic behaviors. And then there's 3 more, which is Puja, Labh, and Pratishta. Right? Puja means the desire to be worshipped for one's service. Labh means to gain material benedictions or material facilities for doing one's devotional service. And Pratishta means distinction and honor. So these are 3 things which falls under the diplomatic behaviors and under the title of Nishiddhachar. So we start today with text, or rather verse 13. Se yukta vairagya taha ta sobhagya taha ija dete harira vaibhava kirtane yahara pratishta sambhara tahara sampati kevala kaitava. So translation is, the devotee who engages his material possessions in the service of Lord Krishna while regulating his material activities of sense gratification according to the injunctions of the revealed Shastras. And here there's a note saying refer to previous verse, because the previous verse was talking about how we should use our material facilities that we have, material possession that we have, in the service of Madhava, who is the husband of the goddess of fortune, right? And the goddess of fortune personally sits on the chest of Madhava. So such a person who does that is actually a yukta vairagi, or a devotee situated in full and appropriate renunciation. He is certainly most fortunate. Even while living in the midst of the material world, whatever opulences he possesses and whatever actions he performs are all aspects of the spiritual opulence and potency of Hari, Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that's the first half of the translation. And I'm just going to read something, because something very practical. This is coming from a purport by Srila Prabhupada in Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Leela 3.4. So Srila Prabhupada is talking about how, because if we talk about renunciation, generally we talk about Nivritta Marg, right? Nivritti Marg, the path of renunciation. But sometimes renunciation doesn't only apply to people who are in the renounced order of life. In Krishna consciousness, renunciation, everyone is a renunciate, even if one is a grihastha, even if one has taken the household or ashram and has acquired sense objects. These sense objects are used in a renounced fashion. They're used in their perfect way, in yukta vairagya. So Jayapataka Maharaj, he takes this purport from the Chaitanya Charitamrita and is talking about Advaita Acharya and how Advaita Acharya was an example of an ideal grihastha in Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada is saying, this is the ideal householder's life. The husband and wife, they live together, and then it's saying what the duties of the husband are and what the duties of the wife are. The husband works very hard to secure paraphernalia. Why? Is it to maintain the house and the family members so that they can enjoy a nice, comfortable, material life? No. Prabhupada is saying, to secure paraphernalia, the husband works, and the paraphernalia which is got, it's gotten for worshipping Lord Vishnu. The wife at home cooks a variety of foodstuffs for Vishnu. And then once that's done, what happens? The husband offers it to the deity, and then arti is performed, and the prasadam is distributed amongst family members and guests. Now, according to Vedic principles, there should always be a guest. The householder should always try to invite a guest at their house to feed. And usually these people are renunciates. So Srila Prabhupada mentions that according to Vedic principles, before taking lunch, the householder should go outside and shout very loudly to see if there is anyone without food. In this way, he invites people to take prasadam. So this is a way that the householder demonstrates renunciation within the bounds of Krishna consciousness. Right? So the householder does accumulate money. The householder does have opulence. But by creating a Krishna conscious feast and distributing the foodstuffs which the householder has worked hard to acquire, the householder is engaged in proper renunciation, yukta vairagya. If someone comes, the householder offers him prasadam. And if there is not much left, he should offer his own portion to the guests. Householders in Krishna consciousness are actually grihastas. That is, those living in the ashrama with their families and children. Sri Advaita Prabhu was an ideal grihastha, and his house was the ideal grihastha ashram. So we don't see this just with Advaita Acharya, like we see it with other grihasthas, like for example in Chaitanya Charitamrita we hear about Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya as well, and how he invited Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to his house, and then his son came, forgot his name. Does anyone remember his name? Amok came, and then he chased him away with a stick. So that was happening at his house, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur's residence as well. So Rupa Goswami also gives us another idea of renunciation within Krishna consciousness. Now, this is applicable to the householder ashram. It's also applicable to people within the householder ashram who are entering the renounced order of life. So let's say from Grihastha to Vanaprastha, or from Vanaprastha even to Sannyas. Or for one who is entering the Brahmacharya ashram, at least in a modern day context, because nowadays usually when people enter the Brahmacharya ashram, they've already been working part-time jobs, or from university, they have accumulated material possessions. So Rupa Goswami says that Srila Rupa Goswami personally set the correct standard of renunciation when he joined Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement. He gave 50% of his material possessions for the service of Lord Krishna and the Vaishnavas, 25% of for his family members, and 25% was kept for possible emergencies. Householders may also keep something aside in case of emergency. It is not considered a material attachment as long as the householder employs his other possessions in the devotional service of the Lord. So the idea is that whatever we have extra material possessions, we should immediately use it in the service of Krishna. We should distribute it away like a Brahmana does. If we hold on to it and we wait for an opportune moment, or I'll do it next month, next year sometime, then there's a tendency for things to accumulate. And that renunciation mood, that mood to renounce things, material things, it doesn't invoke within us. Therefore, especially someone within the householder ashram, every day when the householder cooks food, it is suggested, according to Vedic principles, that he invite some people so that he can give this away. The second part of the translation talks about mityachar. However, if someone is outwardly chanting the holy names of the Lord, or even if he is externally engaged in kirtan or preaching the glories of the holy name, but actually motivated by pratishta, desires, that is, under the control of desires to enhance his material reputation or temporary position, whatever apparent opulences or influence he may have achieved by his efforts are simply the products of cheating, and therefore simply temporary products of Maya, the illusory energy. So there's two different types of ways that we can do devotional service. There's direct devotional activities and there's indirect devotional activities, right? Direct devotional activities are like chanting the holy name, worshipping the deity, worshipping Tulsi Maharani, watering Tulsi Maharani, preaching, giving classes, distributing books. These are all direct devotional activities. But indirect devotional activities, like I remember before joining the ashram, I was at university studying for many years. I worked for some time, and I was always thinking to myself, and I was asking my Guru Maharaj, other Vaishnavas that I was associating with, how can I'm going to study for another 2-3 years, after that I'm going to work for some time, how can I attach or link up this process of going to the university every day, studying, how can I link that up to Krishna consciousness? It's difficult, right? But we have to see that the purpose or the intent for which we are doing it. If the intent is eventually, like in my case, personally in my case, if I went through university, if I saved up a bit of money by working, then that would have been that was a perfect situation for me then to present to my parents that, look, I'm going to join the ashram, and I've set a little bit of money aside, so then you can take it, and in that way I joined. So in that way I connected it up. But this verse is saying that even someone who is directly engaged in Krishna conscious activities, directly in devotional service, in particular it's saying, for example, in Kirtan, inside the mind, if the desire is pratishta, such a person is difficult to identify. Bhagavad Gita says, karmendriyani samyamya yaste manasasmaran. Right? Indriyarthan vimudatma mityachar suchate. Karmendriya. Specifically, the karmendriya means the speech, the hands, legs, the backside, and the genitals. So all these may be controlled within Krishna consciousness. You may externally control the genitals, the power of speech, what you speak. But in your mind, if you're thinking about the objects of sense gratification, then ultimately it will lead to downfall. So that's something that Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is warning us about. So we go on to text, or verse 14. Vishaya mumukshu bhogera bubhukshu duye tyaja mana dui avaishnava krishnera sambandha aprakrita skanda kabu nahe taha jadera sambhava. Translation. My dear mind, due to your false pride, you sometimes think, I am liberated from all attachments to this material world. And at other times you think, I am an expert enjoyer of material sense gratification. You must reject both these mentalities, as both outlooks are totally non-Vaishnava. Instead, you should remain fixed in your relationship as an eternal servitor to Lord Krishna, performing unmotivated devotional service. This pure devotional service belongs to the spiritual world, which is far beyond the influence of this material world of birth and death. While thus purely engaged in Krishna consciousness, it is not possible for the material illusion or material contamination to remain. So, in this particular verse, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is warning us about, particularly about two mentalities. The first is bhukti, and the second one is mukti. Sometimes the mind will tell us, I am liberated from all attachments to this material world. That's called mukti. And sometimes the same mind will tell us, right, bhoga tyaga, because of bhoga tyaga, attachment and renunciation. Our mind will tell us, I'm an expert enjoyer of material sense gratification. So this is bhukti. Chaitanya Charitamrita says, Krishna bhakta nishkama taiva shanta, bhukti mukti siddhikami, sakale ashanta. Bhukti is the desire for enjoying heavenly pleasures, material sense gratification. Mukti is the desire to get rid of all these material pleasures and to merge with Brahman. And Siddhi means to develop, to become the most powerful living entity. In that way we try to imitate Krishna, who is Yogeshwar, the master of all mystic yogic potencies. So these three mentalities are very dangerous for a devotee who is trying to advance in Krishna consciousness. Actually, there's 4 different types of muktis. Srila Prabhupada explains in the beginning of teachings of Lord Chaitanya. He explains that for a devotee who simply, even theoretically, in his mind, if a devotee has the understanding that I'm not the body, I'm the spirit soul, such a devotee is already liberated. This is one type of mukti. Just to have the theoretical understanding that I'm not the body, I'm the soul. A higher type of mukti means to be completely free from the dualities of the mature world. Right? So we see Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmaniga Vihastini to come to that Brahma Bhuta platform. Right? That is another type of mukti, a higher type of mukti. Then a higher type of mukti after that is actually merging into the Brahman effulgence. This is the third type of mukti, to merge into Brahman effulgence. But Aruya Krishna Param Padam Tata Patanti Nadita Yushmat Angraya. Why do they fall down again after attaining Brahman? Because of Avishuddhi, Avishuddha Buddhaya. Avishuddha Buddhaya. Just like, and I'll tell you the last one, the last type of mukti obviously is when the jiva attains his original spiritual swarup, his own spiritual body. This is the actual type of mukti, the real type of mukti that the devotee is after. There's a story of a king who actually went to the prison. And this particular king was an expert administrator of justice. And he met the different prisoners just to see how it's going. And he was talking to the prisoners, and the first prisoner said, you know, actually I'm not guilty. The judge made a mistake pronouncing the judgment that he gave me. Actually, I'm not guilty. I should be set free. And another prisoner said that, you know, I'm not guilty. I should not be serving my sentence in this prison. I should be a free man. The judge was actually bribed during my court case, and I'm here very unfairly. Finally, like that, the king went through numerous different prisoners, and he found that all of them, they were in jail, but they all were saying that they were innocent. Finally, he came to one prisoner, and this was a very humble prisoner. And he even asked, the king even asked the jailer, the local jailer there, and he said, yes, this prisoner is very humble, and he listens to exactly, you know, whatever I tell him to do. He's very menial. And the king went up to this prisoner, and this prisoner just very humbly admitted, yes, I did commit the crime, and I do deserve to be here. So this is the attitude that a devotee has. A devotee admits that he or she has been trying to seek pleasure through bhukti, mukti, and siddhi, kami, that lust to enjoy and become the controller in these three different types of consciousnesses. And because he admits to that, Krishna takes him back home, back to Godhead. He frees him from the grip of Maya in that way. Because the devotee has a surrendered attitude. He admits. But these other prisoners, they try to beat around the bush, and they try to justify why they should actually be free, why they should actually be enjoying in these various different ways. So that's the sort of attitude that we should try to avoid as devotees. So this verse 14, is focusing on bhukti, mukti, and you can also include siddhi in that as well. Jai Shri Raghunath. So we're going to verse 15 now. Mayavadi jana, Krishna tara mana, mukta abhimane se ninde Vaisnava, Vaishnavera dasa tava bhakti asha, kenava dakicha nirjana ahava. Translation: the Mayavadis or impersonalists' mentality is totally separate from Krishna consciousness. Although they are all fallen souls conditioned by material nature, due to illusion they imagine they have achieved liberation from material birth and death, and due to their false pride they commit the greatest offense of blaspheming pure devotees of the Lord. And that's exactly what Prakashananda Saraswati was doing when he got news that Lord Chaitanya was dancing and attracting so many souls in the Prayag area. My dear mind, you are a servant of Lord Krishna. Certainly your desire is to achieve pure loving devotional service to Lord Krishna. So why do you call me to be trapped in this deadly cage of solitary devotional service, Nirjana Bhajan? Why do you want me to imitate the Mayavadi impersonalists' practice of making a false show of renunciation and committing offense against the pure devotees of the Lord? So we're speaking about Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So again, I'll give the definition that Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur gives for a Mayavadi. A Mayavadi is defined by 4 ways. The first way is that the Mayavadi considers Krishna's body to be Maya. So he thinks that when Krishna comes down, his body was not spiritual, it was not Satchit Ananda, it was actually made from the material energy. So they understand that Brahman is spiritual, but when that little portion of Brahman comes down to this material world, it takes on the material characteristics, and therefore ultimately it's illusion. It doesn't exist. It's false. That's what they believe, that Krishna's body is Maya. The second characteristic of a Mayavadi is that he believes that the abode of Krishna, Vaikuntha, Golok, Vrndavan, this is also Maya. So not only is Krishna Maya, but Krishna's residence, his dham, is also Maya. The third thing, the process of devotional service to reach Krishna and Krishna's abode is also Maya. That's the third point. And the fourth point, the paraphernalia of Krishna is also Maya. Now we see something very different. Lord Shiva, the Vaisnava, the topmost Vaisnava, is telling his wife something very different. He tells Durga Devi that more than worshipping Lord Vishnu, one should actually worship Lord Vishnu's paraphernalia, specifically the devotees. But what does the Mayavadi say? He says, forget Lord Vishnu. Lord Vishnu's Maya, but even Lord Vishnu's paraphernalia, that's also Maya as well. So that's why Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he took sannyas it's explained in the purport in CC, he took sannyas to defeat not only this Mayavadi concept that we can have, and it's very easy for us to develop this Mayavadi concept without the association of devotees. How we see that with the example of Mukunda. Right? Mukunda was associating with devotees, he was discussing Srimad Bhagavatam. At the same time, he was going away from devotees and he was discussing Mayavad topics as well. And this very greatly displeased Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But then later on, he got Mahaprabhu's mercy as well. So if we go away from devotees, this is another pitfall that we have to look out for. Mayavad. To deny the existence of Krishna and the process of devotional service. Even saying, oh, it doesn't work, this is also one of the roots, not the roots, but one of the seedlings of that sort of tendency to creep up on us as well. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he took sannyas to defeat the Mayavadi tendency, but also some other tendencies as well, like Adama Paduya. Like Mukunda, he falls into that category. Although he's a pure devotee of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for the sake of example, he falls into this category of Adama Paduya, the fallen students. Students of spiritual life who don't have access to that full knowledge of bhakti. They're known as Adama Paduya. They can be impersonalists. You have the Nindakas, the blasphemers, Kutarkikas, the false logicians, like Prakashananda Saraswati. And there's so many more. There's the Pashandis as well. So it's, in total there's 6 actually. So these different consciousnesses, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu defeated by taking sannyas. So there's one more thing on top of this verse discussing with Mayavadis. One of the other things which His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj focuses on is this attitude of aggrandizement and pratishtha when we're actually performing devotional service. And he gives an actual example about Srila Prabhupada and how he started Krishna consciousness and how he tried to utilize the help of his fellow God brothers, but how they didn't help him. So this is something which is coming from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrit. This first paragraph I'm going to read, and then later on Jayapataka Maharaj is writing here himself. So this is on November 8, 1965, New York City. So this is from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrit. Prabhupada wrote to his godbrother Tirtha Maharaj, who had become the president of the Gaudiya Math, to remind him that their spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, had a strong desire to open preaching centers in the Western world, in the Western countries. If the leaders of the Gaudiya Math would consider opening their own branch in New York, Now, by this time, in 1964, Srila Prabhupada was well on his way to actually doing that. Srila Prabhupada would be willing to manage it. So Srila Prabhupada is extending himself. So now Maharaj writes, unfortunately, Srila Prabhupada's request was not accepted, and he had no choice but to continue preaching Krishna consciousness alone. And we know how he struggled in New York for the first year all by himself. Through his divine graces preaching, many fallen souls were delivered and gradually turned into devotees. One would think that this service was an adequate attempt to cooperate and serve with the Vaishnavas, but the pure devotee always aspires to fulfill the order of his spiritual master and cooperate with other devotees as well. So we may have the capacity to carry out our service by ourselves. Like, for example, Hanuman. When Hanuman jumped to Lanka, he actually thought to himself that, and he definitely could have, he thought to himself that he could defeat Ravana and completely destroy Lanka all by himself. He was that powerful. But still, within his heart, even though he could have done it, he thought that actually I should depend on Ramachandra and the other monkeys, and I should give Ramachandra the rightful chance to come all the way to Lanka and to save his wife Sita Devi himself. So we should never think, although we may have the capacity, the potency, the strength, the intelligence, the wealth, the time, all these things we may have, and they may force us to think that we can do bhakti ourselves. But we should always try to depend on the devotees and always do devotional service with them. So it continues on. So Srila Prabhupada is then forced to start Krishna consciousness movement by himself. And then this is now in 1972. So this is when Mayapur, the project in Mayapur has already started, and the headquarters of ISKCON are being built in Mayapur. When in 1972 His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada arrived in Sridham, Mayapur to inaugurate the new center of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the first thing he did was send his disciples, including the translator of his work, to invite all the followers of his spiritual master to a meeting at the new ISKCON World Headquarters. So Prabhupada is sending his disciples to invite the followers of his spiritual master to come and participate in this opening of the Mayapur project. When they had all assembled on Srila Prabhupada's invitation, he paid his humble obeisances to them and begged them to reunite and cooperate. So even though they had previously declined his request so many times, Srila Prabhupada is still showing his humility. So Srila Prabhupada said to the effect to them, "It is the desire of our beloved spiritual master, His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that we all cooperate together. Let us work as one. Let us reunite. Now I have many sincere followers from various foreign countries. I will provide you with the vehicles, give financial aid to finish your incomplete temple constructions, and give foreign devotees to accompany your preaching parties. Let us all work together as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur desired." But this is the reply that Srila Prabhupada got. In spite of this sincere and humble appeal, his offer was not accepted. In private, one head acharya of a temple explained, "Your stature as a preacher and devotee is so great that if we reunite with you, our position will be diminished by your side. Who will care for us when they see and hear you? Better to be the head of 200 followers than second place in the midst of thousands." So we may laugh at it, it may seem humorous now that we're discussing it in detail, but this does come to us. If we see someone advancing in Krishna consciousness, achieving great things, then we get envious of such a person. We may not, like this particular acharya is speaking out, and he's revealing his heart, which is a mature thing to do in bhakti. It's not good to keep things inside. But still, that is the tendency which creeps up on us, even as devotees. We need to be very careful of not being envious of devotees, because ultimately, for everyone, all devotees, the goal should be the pleasure of Krishna. If we see another devotee advancing past us, even they may start off as a neophyte devotee and advance past us, achieving great things, we should follow such a devotee and render our service to such a devotee, because that will please Krishna more. And we will get the blessings of such a devotee, and we ourselves will advance in Krishna consciousness as well. So it's a very interesting thing I thought I would just read. So we go on to verse 16. Ye falgu vairagi kahe nija tyagi se na pare kabu hoite Vaisnava hari pada chari nirjanata badi labhya ki phala falgu se vaibhava. Someone who falsely renounces objects which can actually be utilized in devotional service to Lord Krishna as material is known as a falgu vairagi. So again, we're coming back to the topic, the repeated topic of yukta vairagya and falgu vairagya. Prapanchikatya buddhya hari sambandha vastuna mumukshubir parityago falgu vairagyam katyate. One who doesn't see an object's relationship with Krishna and therefore renounces it is situated in false renunciation. Due to false pride, he claims to be a great renunciate. However, by his practice of dry renunciation, a falgu vairagi is never able to become a Vaishnava, a pure devotee of Lord Krishna. So there's a story of, like Srila Prabhupada often used to tell a couple of stories about Alexander the Great. Okay, we know Alexander the Great was a great conqueror, he was a great king of Macedon, and he traveled all the way through the Middle East, and eventually he reached the borders of Bharatavarsha. And at that time, India's borders, Bharatavarsha's borders, of course Pakistan was at that time part of India, so it extended all the way into Persia, actually. So a great massive land extending into Central Asia. Central Asia. So he came there, and it's explained that Alexander the Great was always interested in the customs and the rituals of the different lands that he was invading. So one day his spies in that land of Bharatavarsha where they were approaching, he sent some spies into that land. And as these spies were walking through the forest, every now and then they would approach or they would encounter these strange men who were practically naked. Some were naked, some were just wearing a loincloth, and they would just lie down in the forest in a bed of leaves, and the whole day they'll just be meditating. So these were the sadhus, the transcendentalists in the land of Bharatavarsha. So, he was very curious. His spies were a bit bewildered. Who are these people just living in the forest just like this, without anything, without any clothes, not caring for shelter or food or anything like that, completely renounced. So he told one of his spies, go up to them and give them this message. And the message was, I, Alexander the Great, Son of God, King of the world, I summon you. He was referring to a particular sadhu, particular Brahmin sadhu. Come before me, I want to talk to you about your practices. If you do, I will reward you with great riches, great wealth. If you don't, you will be killed. So the spies went and they approached that particular sadhu in the forest and they told him that exact message by Alexander. And then the sadhu, he didn't seem very, bewildered by such a statement by Alexander the Great. He says, there's only one king in this world. In this whole universe, in this whole creation, there's only one king. And that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How can you say that your king, Alexander the Great, is actually the most powerful king when he himself is subject to the king of death, Yamaraj? Does he not know that all the sins he's committing, all the violence that he is causing towards other living entities, he will be accountable for that at the time of death? How is he going to explain that to Yamaraj? Tell him that I don't care for any possessions that I have. I'm not attached to anything. Indeed, even if he wants to kill my body, he may kill my physical body, but he cannot kill my soul. So go and relay this message. Therefore, I will not come before him. So when this message was actually relayed back to Alexander the Great, it's explained that when he heard this message, he actually told this particular spy or messenger, he told him that this naked man in the forest has defeated me. Because there is nothing I can do with all my might, all my power, all my army to make this person submit. So this is the power of renunciation, the power of vairagya, but not just dry renunciation based on knowledge that we are not this body, that whatever possessions we have, we should not use it for our sense gratification, but we should use it in Krishna's service. Therefore, we are not attached to material objects for ourselves, but we are attached to material objects to use them in Krishna's service, if they can be used properly. Right? So this is the power of Yukta Vairagya. And yeah, another great example is actually Dadichi Muni from Srimad Bhagavatam. We see that Dadichi Muni, when the demigods approached him in the 6th canto, because they needed his bones to create the Vajra for Indra, so that he could kill Vitrasura. And in a moment, Dadichi Muni just agreed. Yes, you can kill me and you can use my bones and you can construct the weapons that you need to kill Vitrasura. So this is like the ideal example of Yukta Vairagya, to give up your own body for the sake of service of the demigods of Lord Vishnu to fulfill his desires. Of course, we should not give up our body, because Sanatana Goswami, who wanted to give up his life because his body was sore with so many different pus and all that sort of stuff, at that time Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told him that your body doesn't belong to you, your body belongs to me. Therefore, don't commit suicide, don't give it up. But still, this example of Dadichi shows us to the nth degree the power of Yukta Vairagya, that we're not attached to anything, even our own material bodies we're not attached to. Everything is to be used in Krishna's service. In this particular verse, I want to read one other point about pride and a healthy fear that a devotee has. So, pride or damba, as we know. Pride is the first symptom of spiritual fall down. Jayapataka Maharaj explains, when a devotee becomes proud, he ceases to fear the material energy and considers himself sufficiently advanced to become independent from the order of the spiritual master and the association of devotees. That's pride. So a materialist has pride, whereas a devotee has fear. Now, you may ask, like, why is a devotee scared? A devotee sees everything in relationship to Krishna. And according to Srimad Bhagavatam, therefore the devotee is fearless. But here, it's explained, I'll just check where it's coming from. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam 10:8, purport. A pure devotee is always transcendentally situated because of executing 9 different processes of bhakti yoga, right? Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, etc. Thus situated in devotional service, a devotee, although in the material world, is not in the material world. Yet a devotee always fears, because I am associated with the material world, so many contaminations affect me. Therefore, he is always alert in fear, which gradually diminishes his material association. So the point being made here is that a devotee has a healthy fear towards Maya. And Srila Prabhupada explains, here it says, Srila Prabhupada praises this fear as the transcendental opulence of a devotee. So fear of Maya is the transcendental opulence of a devotee. One of the qualities of a devotee is that a devotee should have fear, but they should be fearful of Maya. And it's explained that this fear of Maya diminishes the attraction towards Maya and reduces the material association. The example given here in this particular purport is that of Devaki, who represents bhakti, and then you have Kamsa, who is instilling fear. So Devaki is afraid of Kamsa, who is like an agent of Maya. And she's fearful of Kamsa, and this, it says here in the purport that symbolically Mother Devaki's constant fear of Kamsa was actually purifying her. And Marichi, who is the Manasaputra of Brahma, he has 6 sons: Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya. Lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and envy. So this fear, right, of Maya eventually leads to the destruction of these 6 sons of Marichi, and then it gives way for Sankarshan, Lord Balaram, to enter within bhakti. So we take shelter of Sankarshan, Balaram, or Guru. And by taking shelter of Guru and following the Guru's instructions, then Krishna comes, right? Krishna was the last to come within the womb of Devaki. So it's a very nice analogy. So a devotee is fearless because he or she has no material attachments. At the same time, one of the transcendental opulences of a devotee is that a devotee is fearful of Maya. And this fear propels the devotee to advance in Krishna consciousness. So go to verse 17. We have 3 verses. We'll go through it quickly. Radha Dasye. So we're coming to the end now. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur now gives us what we should be doing. So far he's been telling us what we should be avoiding. Pratishta, Nirjan Bhajan, all these different things. Sadhu Ninda, Vaisnava Aparad. So now he's starting to tell us what we should be cultivating. My dear Radha Dasya Rahi, Chari Bhoga Ahi, Pratishdasha Nahe Kirtana Gaurava, Radha Nitya Jana, Taha Chari Mana, Kena Va Nirjana, Bhajana Kaitava. Translation. My dear mind, now with determination, let us remain eternally in the service of the servant of Srimati Radharani, the spiritual embodiment of the purest love of Krishna. Give up every last trace of attraction to the vicious snake of material desires for sense gratification, subtle or gross. Srila Prabhupada explains in a lecture that even if one has one pinch of material desire, Krishna is so kind that he will give that soul the facility to take another material body to fulfill that one pinch of material desire. Give up all desires to achieve cheap fame or some position of temporary material importance through chanting the holy names of Krishna. As with these material desires, one cannot realize the transcendental glories of congregational chanting of the holy names of Lord Krishna in Sankirtan. My dear mind, completely give up these illusory attachments and totally surrender yourself to the service of Srimati Radharani's eternal devotees. Why shall we leave the transcendental association of confidential devotees to engage in the cheating process of solitary worship, Nirjan Bhajan? There's an interesting conversation which Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur outlines in his book Jaiva Dharma, because you have these 2 different rasas. You have the Madhurya rasa, which is defined as transcendental sweetness, an attachment to transcendental sweetness. And then you have another one, which is analogous. Same thing. Analogous means similar. Audarya. Audarya means transcendental magnanimity. And in his book, Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes that in Golok Vrndavan, there's 2 sections. There's a Krishna Peet section, there's a Nitya Vrndavan section, and there's a Nitya Navadip section. There's a Gaura Peet section. So the Gaura Peet section is a Krishna Peet section. Those devotees, while practicing Krishna consciousness in the mature world, cultivate more of a bhav of transcendental magnanimity, or Audorya bhav, and they prefer to worship Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Such devotees, they enter the Nitya Navadip section. Other devotees who prefer to go deep into that sweetness bhav with Krishna, they worship Lord Chaitanya, but they have a preference to worship Lord Krishna. Such devotees enter Vrndavan, he explains. And then, those other devotees, and this is what Srila Prabhupada has encouraged us to do, those devotees, while practicing their sadhana, they worship Lord Chaitanya and Lord Krishna. Srila Prabhupada told us that before we chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, we should take the blessings of the Panchatattva. So we should worship the Panchatattva, Shishi Gaurnitai, and then we should worship Lord Krishna. And we see that in our activities, in our daily programs, we're worshipping Lord Krishna's eternal devotees, like Tulsi Marni, we do the Tulsi Puja. And at the same time, throughout the day, we're going out into the streets and doing Harinam Sankirtan, distributing books. For whose pleasure? For the pleasure of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is the Yagya Purush of Kali Yuga. So we're simultaneously worshipping Krishna, Gopinath, and we're simultaneously worshipping Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as well. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that those devotees in their sadhana stage, when they worship both Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Krishna equally, such devotees, when they are finally liberated, they have two bodies, spiritual bodies. One is eternally residing in the Krishna Peeth, and one is eternally residing in Gaura. So some very interesting information there. But these two bhavas, Audharya and Madhurya, they're related in that the more intensely we love Krishna, then the more intensely we would want to give Krishna to others, show compassion to others, magnanimity to others, and give the best charity of giving Krishna to others as well. That's why often it's explained and demonstrated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that this Sankirtan movement, this Sankirtan Yagya, is originally coming from Srimati Radharani, the topmost devotee of Krishna. Karmebhya parito hare priyataya vyaktim yayurgyaninas tebhyo jnana vimukta bhakta parama premeka nisthastada tebhyasta pashupala pankaja drishas tabhyopi saradhika preshta tadvadyam tadiya sarasi kim nashrayat kakriti. So Rupa Goswami explains in Upadeshamrita that better than the karmis are the jnanis, better than the jnanis are the devotees, better than just an ordinary devotee is that devotee who's nishtha in bhakti, fixed up in bhakti. Out of such devotees who are nishtha in bhakti are the residents of Vrndavan, and the topmost devotee of Krishna in Vrndavan is Srimati Radharani. Similarly, that lake which belongs to Radha Kund is also very dear to Krishna. Yata Radha Priya Vishnus Tasya Kundam Priyam Tata. It's explained also. So this Sankirtan Yagya, this Sankirtan mission is actually originally coming from Srimati Radharani because she has an intense attachment to Krishna. She is showing that transcendental magnanimity, Audharya, compassion upon the fallen conditioned souls, coming as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he has the bhav of Srimati Radharani to distribute Krishna consciousness to others. Okay, we've got two more verses. Text, verse 18. Vrajavasi gana pracharaka dhana pratishta bhikshuka tara nahesh shava prana ache tanra se hetu prachara pratisht asha hina Krishna gatha sabha. The Vrajabasis, eternal associates of Krishna in Vrndavan, considered by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to be the best and most perfect devotees. Personal treasure is preaching the glories of Lord Krishna. So the Vrajabasi's personal treasure is not just to live in Vrndavan, but to preach the glories of Lord Krishna outside of Vrndavan. They are always glorifying Krishna. They never desire cheap popularity or temporary material position, which is hankered after by the living dead. These eternally liberated devotees perform the confidential service of preaching the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His holy name because they possess real compassion and the eternal life of Krishna consciousness. Completely free from all motives for personal material reputation and temporary influence, the pure devotees are completely and irrevocably bound to Lord Krishna through ties of loving devotional service. This perfectly describes our Srila Prabhupada. There's another nice verse in the Srila Prabhupada Stotram, which was written by one of his disciples. Vrindavane ramanareti prasiddha bhumo tatrapi Krishna balarama supadamule jnanam param parama Krishna sudurmatyuktam dantastu deva Prabhupada namo namaste. So this particular verse is explaining how Srila Prabhupada is situated in Vrindavan, in Ramanreti, at the feet of Krishna Balaram. And what is he doing? Sitting at the feet of Krishna Balaram in Ramanreti in Vrindavan, he's preaching Jnanam Param Parama Krishna Sudurmatyuktam, the glories of Krishna, Krishna consciousness, broadcasting it, sitting in Vrindavan, to everyone throughout the whole world. So when it says here that we should follow a Brajabasi, like in Rupa Goswami in text, I think 6 of Nectar of Instruction, he says, Tishthan Vraje Tadanuragi Jananugami Kalam Nayad Akhilam Iti Upadeshasaram. Right? One should follow some particular resident of Vrindavan. For us, that resident of Vrindavan is Srila Prabhupada. And I think Maharaj mentions in the purport that Vrndavan, a Brajabasi is not someone who just lives physically in Vrndavan, but their consciousness is that of a Brajabasi, which, as is mentioned here, they're always wanting to glorify Krishna. So someone who's physically residing outside of Vrndavan, but actively glorifying and preaching about Krishna consciousness to others, such a person is also a Brajabasi. Now Srila Prabhupada did both things. Srila Prabhupada lived in Vrndavan, close to 10 years before he came to the West, and he was living in the Radha Damodar temple practically every day. I think it's mentioned he used to visit the Samadhi of Rupa Goswami, Srila Jiva Goswami. But all the while, he was doing his Nam Bhajan. All the while, in his mind, he was thinking and meditating, how can I take Vrindavan outside of Vrindavan and give it to others? How can I take the Vrindavan consciousness, Krishna consciousness, the consciousness that the Brajabasis have, how can I take that consciousness outside of Vrindavan and give it to others? This is what Srila Prabhupada is planning. So, real Brajabasi is someone who expands the Sankirtan movement. So, we are very fortunate that we have access to Srila Prabhupada, if not as Prabhupada's Diksha disciple. If we're too late to manifest, to appear on earth to be Srila Prabhupada's Diksha disciple, then at least we have full access to be Srila Prabhupada's Shiksha disciple by reading his books and following his instructions. And then finally we come to the last verse of Vaishnava Ke. Shri Daita Dasa Kirtanete Asha Kara Uchesware Harinama Rava Kirtana Prabhave Smarana Svabhave Se Kale Bhajana Nirjana Sambhava. This Shri Daita Dasa, which refers to His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the humble servitor of the all-merciful Srimati Radharani, simply desires to be absorbed in the nectar of spreading the glories of Lord Krishna's holy names. So this is the deep desire of the Acharya. My dear mind, now let us loudly chant the holy names of Lord Krishna so we can continuously remain in the ocean of transcendental nectar. The congregational chanting of the holy names of Lord Krishna awakens the transcendental quality of natural, spontaneous, loving remembrance of Lord Krishna, including the Lord's form, qualities and pastimes. At that moment, now this is important, at that moment, the confidential realization and pure practice of solitary, loving, devotional service to the Lordships, Sri Sri Radha Krishna, is possible. So the whole, the previous 18 verses, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has been saying, don't do Nirjan Bhajan, it's bad. It will take you away from the association of devotees, will make you a Mayavad, all these things he's been saying. Then finally he is saying that in the core of his heart, he desires to simply, in the association of devotees, chant loudly the holy names of Radha Krishna. And when one comes to that stage where one has natural, spontaneous, loving remembrance of Lord Krishna by serving with the other Vaishnavas, then he's saying, at that moment, solitary, loving, devotional service to their Lordships is possible, not otherwise. Now, because we're talking about serving with devotees, I just want to include one thing as part of this seminar about Sadhu Ninda, just really quickly. We'll finish another 3-4 minutes, I hope. So this is from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Madhurya Kadambini. So if one happens to commit offenses towards a Vaishnava, then, and you can see that the other Vaishnava is upset, the first thing that one should do is one should lament, because that fire of lamentation, it helps to absolve and destroy that Vaishnava aparad. But one should not only lament within oneself, one should go up to the other Vaishnava and pay obeisance to the other Vaishnava. Okay, that's the first thing. If the Vaishnava is not satisfied, Vaishnavas are wish-fulfilling trees. Okay, but there's different levels of Vaishnavas. So, if the Vaishnava is still not satisfied by paying obeisances to him and lamenting, then, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains, then one should become the humble servant of such a Vaishnava and be on his or her beck and call to fulfill each and every single one of his or her desires. So whatever desires the Vaishnava wants, you should just become a humble servant of that Vaishnava. This is what he says. If that doesn't work, if the Vaishnava is still not satisfied by you becoming their servant, then he says, then you have no other recourse but to take to the constant chanting of Nam. Because by constantly chanting the holy name of Lord Krishna, non-stop, the power of Nam will gradually nullify even that Vaishnava aparad. But he warns that if one thinks to oneself that if chanting the holy name of Lord Krishna is going to absolve the Vaishnava aparad, then what is there a need for me to, pay my obeisances to the other Vaishnava, become a servant of the other Vaishnava? If I commit an offense against another Vaishnava, then I should just chant the holy name constantly. He says this constitutes another offense, increased offense. So no, you don't directly jump to chanting the holy name to absolve a Vaishnava aparad. First you go and apologize. If he doesn't accept the apology, then become their servant. If that doesn't work, as a last resort, take to the constant chanting of the holy name. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains. And he also explains that Vaishnava aparad is not just for some great Vaishnava, some pure devotee. Vaishnava aparad you can do even to a neophyte bhakta who has all bad qualities. They've just started Krishna consciousness, right? They may still have so many material attachments. Still, the same process is to be applied to such a devotee as well. So from the purest devotees down to the most neophyte devotees who still have so many material attachments, one can cause Vaishnava aparad to such a devotee as well. And he says that if you commit Vaishnava aparad and the Vaishnava is so exalted that the Vaishnava doesn't display any anger or any unhappiness, they're very peaceful, they're detached, they're absorbed in Krishna's service, still, even if you don't see an expression of anger or disappointment on the face of the Vaishnava when you've committed an aparad, still you should find ways to satisfy that Vaishnava and serve that Vaishnava, he says. So even if he or she doesn't get angry, they're still peaceful, even if you offended them, still you should apologize and find different means and ways of serving. So I'm going to finish this class just by talking about Srila Prabhupada's Nirjan Bhajan. Jayapataka Maharaj writes, in 1977, at the age of 81, Srila Prabhupada suffered illness repeatedly and became in a physically weakened state. He decided to discontinue his traveling around the world and take to the shelter of Vrndavan Dham, the sacred place of Lord Krishna's pastimes. He listened and chanted Hare Krishna and meditated on the transcendental pastimes of Krishna day and night. Srila Prabhupada, however, always remained in the association of his loving disciples. So even at such an advanced stage at the end of his life, Srila Prabhupada never left the association of his disciples, who assisted him during his final pastime by very softly and sweetly chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra 24 hours a day. Now this is interesting. Srila Prabhupada said this was his Nirjan Bhajan, and that his sannyasi disciples, including the translator of his work, had to take over the responsibility of traveling and preaching all over the world, as he would not be able to travel anymore. In Srila Prabhupada's purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 4.28.33, Srila Prabhupada defines his take on Nirjan Bhajan. He says, following this example, the devotees of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness now render service as preachers in various parts of the world. Now they can allow the spiritual master to retire from active preaching work. In the last stage of the spiritual master's life, the devotees of the spiritual master should take the preaching activities into their own hands. In this way, the spiritual master can sit down in a solitary place and render Nirjan Bhajan. So the point is that to get to that stage, it's not necessary that a devotee does Nirjan Bhajan, as is definitely explained and hammered into us by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. It is not required. But if circumstantially it comes to that stage, as was the case with Srila Prabhupada at the age of 81, one can only do such a thing if one throughout one's life has constantly associated with and served the devotees and engaged in Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan mission. And when that spontaneous attraction for Krishna is there within one's heart, that sort of a serving Krishna in solitude may be possible. But as we see in Srila Prabhupada's example, even though Srila Prabhupada had reached that stage, I mean, Srila Prabhupada's a Nitya Siddha, we cannot say that he had reached that stage. Srila Prabhupada always had that qualification. Still, physically, circumstantially, when Srila Prabhupada in his pastimes reached that period of time, still Srila Prabhupada kept the association of his disciples. So in this way, Jai Patak Maharaj finishes by saying that in this verse of this work, the mind was chastised for desiring to chant the Hare Krishna. Yes, a devotee can safely cross over the most dangerous obstacles on the path of Krishna consciousness simply by remembering these instructions in 19 verses. By realizing these practical lessons, the aspiring devotee can understand the real standard of pure devotion to Krishna. Through self-analysis, with the aid of these teachings, a devotee can ascertain the level of personal purity and advancement in Krishna consciousness and make the necessary corrections to safeguard against the hidden pitfalls on the path of Krishna consciousness. So with that we'll finish. Vaisnava K. What kind of devotee are you? Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai.